to, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them. Moving right along, I want to talk a little bit about how you can integrate the file manager into your blocks. This is a pretty common thing that people need to do. And to do this, I am going to bring back a block type that we brought out last time. This is the sidebar contact information block. If you recall, that block was a super simple example block that lets you specify an address, some email addresses, phone numbers, fax numbers for someone in a faculty at a college. But what's interesting that we didn't go over much last time is the top here, you can choose an image for them. So typically, in who we built this for, this would be like someone's face, and then we would under here you would choose under here you would choose where it was. Add this contact information, thumbnail info. So the most compelling part about this is this file manager integration that we have up here. And fortunately, if you're going to use the file manager in your blocks, it is not difficult for you to do so. So let me go grab the contact information block. If you'll recall, both the add and edit templates actually work with one shared template. So that's what form.php is. And integrating with the concrete5 file manager is very, very simple. So at the very top of our form.php, you can see we have header image. That's this label up here. And then here, I'll come back to this in a second. The first thing that we do is we load up the concrete5 asset library helper. And now this is really sort of a misnomer. At one point, we referred to the file manager as the asset library. That's why there is a helper named asset library. If we were to do it again at this point, we'd probably call it file manager because that's how we refer to it everywhere else. But this is how you integrate the asset library with your own interfaces. So the next thing we do is we just print the asset library helper has a method called file, and it just takes some arguments. The first one is just a unique ID. You can name this anything you want. It's probably not even, if we were to rebuild this again, I wouldn't even include it. It's not even necessary really to have to specify this, but you know, you do. So this does not get sent to the post or anything. It does let you give a unique ID to some of the divs that are wrapping the functions. Next, you specify the name of the when you save this file, you specify how you want to what the name for the post parameter that you want to save the ID in. So this could be anything as well. It's just know that when you submit the form with this thing in it, whatever the file that is currently selected up here, its numerical file ID will be sent in this parameter here. So much like address, email, phone, fax, since this is a block, you want to make sure that you have a, whatever you name this, you want to make sure that you have it in your database table. So you could even call this header image file ID. And if you did that, you'd want to make sure that you named that column, an integer type column, in your database table, header image file ID. but it's a pretty common concrete5 convention to call files FID or F something ID, and so that's what we've done here. Next, you choose the name for what this looks like when there's no file selected. So you could change this here. You can see choose a contact information photo. So you can change out that text. And then finally, an optional fourth argument is the file object. So let's say I don't pass anything to that. When I'm adding a new contact information, works just fine. Works totally fine. If I edit an existing one, you can see that nothing shows up. That's because I'm not passing the selected file object. So that's what this function up here is doing. It checks to see whether there is an FID parameter, because that's what we named it in our database table, in the local scope, and that it's greater than 0. If so, we get the file object for that FID because we get it by the numerical file ID property. And this will either return always return an object. It's just it may not have any info about it. If it is an invalid file, it will return is error equals true. And so what you see us doing here is checking to see whether this is a valid file object. If it gets into here, it is not valid, so we unset the FO object before it gets passed into here. So with this line of code, we've handled both the add and the edit functionality. There are a few convenience functions in the asset library helper that you might find useful. You'll notice if I go to add an image block and I click here, you can see only displaying image files, and I only get image files in here. If I go to add a video player, see only displaying video files. That happens through a few helper methods in the asset library helper. So the core method that you can always use is file. That just opens up the asset library for any and all files that you have permissions to see. But then there are some other ones. There's image, video, text, audio, doc, and app. Although that's not really that useful. That's kind of more miscellaneous. These sort of correspond to the generic types that we have in concrete5. So, behind the scenes image, that encompasses pings, it encompasses GIFs, it encompasses JPEGs, TIFFs, all that stuff. So, these are convenience functions that are meant so that you can only include select files of a certain type. And all the other arguments for those are the same. And that's really all you have to do to include the asset library. It's super simple to include more than one. So if you look at the image block, you can see that we have two file objects here: controller get file object, controller get file on state object. And here we have two asset library helper implementations. The first one, choose image on state. These correspond to the two columns in our image database table. And then we just pass the two selected objects to that. And even though they're, it's complex JavaScript and it's, doing all this different stuff, even though that's the case, it both works. They both work independently of each other, and concrete5 takes care of making that work. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, feel free to type them into the chat. Oscar asks if there are any simple ways to work with file sets as opposed to just individual images. Not really, unfortunately. We can take a look at the slideshow block, which does work with the file manager, and it does provide the ability to choose a file set. But you're going to be coding that stuff up yourself mostly. So if I add a slideshow here, you can see that I have pictures from a file set, and I don't have any sets, so it's not showing up there. But the slideshow block itself just has an include that is being used, and then we call a function called getMySets from the file set class, and then we pass an array into that include here, which we then loop through. So, I mean, if you really want to get into some of the more some of the deeper aspects of working with the asset library, the slideshow block is a good one to look at. But you know, once you get past this kind of basic choose a document from the asset library, you're going to be coding up your own interfaces a fair amount of the time. Faust asks, are file sets the only way to allow someone to add an arbitrary number of files in a block? Let's say it is an item listing block that may have one or more images related to it. No, they're not, but unfortunately, there's no simple... since the needs change so frequently, there's no simple function that makes it so you can choose one-to-many images instead of just one. But we can look a little bit at how we coded it up for the slideshow block. So again, if I add a slideshow, you can see I can choose a custom slideshow, and when I click Add Image, I can choose this, then I can click another image, choose this one, click another image, choose this one. I can move them around. I can remove one. I can set different parameters on each one, and then I can add it to the page, and then I can edit it. Unfortunately, setting this up took a fair amount of work. So we'll walk through how this works here. When I'm adding or editing, I am including a file called form setup.html. So this is used in both add or edit mode. We can skip over this thing at the beginning because all it does is determine whether we're working with file set or a custom list, and we're concerning ourselves with the custom list. And now what we're doing here is we are including a row. We have a template in our block called image row include.php, and we include that with some placeholder content. And then above it at the top, we check to see whether we're editing a block. And if we are editing a block, we loop through all the images selected and we include that image row for each one. That's in the image row template is this thing you're seeing here. And that just includes everything for each image, including its file name, the JavaScript that moves it up and down. It includes the file ID for the image, etc. And finally, the kind of meat of what actually, how to interact with the image block or the file manager in a custom way is handled with this button here, Add Image at the top. That is just a button which calls a function in a JavaScript, calls a JavaScript function called choose_image. And then we take a look at auto.js. choose_image calls a core concrete5 JavaScript function called CCM_launch file manager. And then we actually launch it with some custom parameters that limits it to only showing images. So that's how to actually launch the file manager through JavaScript without interacting with the with the asset library helper at all. So clicking on this launches the file manager, only displaying image files. And then what you want to do is you're then going to need to define a function called CCM_choose_asset. So when we launch the file manager, if we click on this and select choose, the file manager checks to see whether this function is defined. And since the slideshow block has defined it, it will send the file object in JavaScript to that function to do with as it pleases. So slideshow block select object is another function in this auto.js somewhere. Here we go. Basically just runs this add new image with all of these different parameters. So the object that gets passed to CCM choose asset contains a lot of information about the selected files, including its file ID, path to its thumbnail, its height, the title from the file manager, and then this add new image is more custom JavaScript in the slideshow block, which takes care of actually creating this template here. So when I click this, it runs my custom JavaScript. So all the hooks are available in the file manager for you to build your own completely custom image interfaces. But unfortunately, I mean, since every time anyone needs to do this, they're always storing different stuff along with each file, we thought it would be best to give maximum control, but really you do have to write your own interfaces for it. So if you do find that being the case, I'd highly recommend the slideshow block as a place to start. Please, if you use it as a place to start, only take the functionality from the controller or the block views that you actually use, because otherwise it might actually be slower than necessary. Yeah, I would. And then there's also the concrete5 gallery block in the marketplace is a pretty simple way of a different, similar core approaches, but using those custom JavaScript hooks. Oscar asks, how do you handle when they select multiple images right inside of the file manager? And that is a good question. So what happens if you are using the previous asset library helper? It'll only let you. It will only. Actually, I don't remember. I believe it lets you choose multiple, but it'll only select the actual last one that you've done. Let's see. Choose new file. So if I select this guy and this guy, and I select choose, it just chooses the last one that I have in there. But if I'm using this, and I click add image, and I select all these guys, when I hit choose, it will actually loop through all the images, and it will run that CCM choose asset functionality. So since I've coded that up for one, if I select choose, it actually works without a hitch for all of them. And then my custom JavaScript takes care of it from there. So, you know, hooking into the file manager in a custom way is pretty easy once you know what functions you need to, how you launch the thing, and then what function you need of a file. All right, moving right along. I think we're going to talk a little bit about block caching at this point. First, I'm going to delete this slideshow block. I'm going to make sure that my cache is on. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to this front page here. So you've heard us talk a bit about block caching, caching in general. In general, concrete5, we cache at a variety of levels. You know, at the simplest level, we store objects that we work with frequently in some sort of caching layer so that we can retrieve them hopefully more quickly than having to reconstitute them through database queries every single time we need them. In concrete5, 5.4.2, I believe, we added some more granular control to caching at the block level. Just checking, doing some checking to make sure that everything's coming through okay. Technical challenges. I disappear from time to time. Well, I'm going to try and forge ahead, but I'll revisit stuff in case anything gets a little dicey. I'll speak slower. Yeah, so we have included a number of different variables that you can define in your block controller to handle more aggressive block caching from time to time. And we're going to go through that. These are the variables that I am referring to. You don't have to define these at all in your block. If you don't define them, they will be assumed to be false, and your block will use the least amount of caching, which might be good for certain things. But many blocks can benefit from defining these to true, and it will, in general, speed up sites as they are defined as true. So the first of and so I'm going to go through what these mean. BT cache block record. This one is the one you can most likely set to true without worrying about any ill effects. So what does cache block record mean? So in concrete5, the way that we handle block saving, you know, you don't have to, for many of these simple blocks, you don't have to write any database queries. It automatically will take care of saving the relevant fields to the right database tables, etc. Well, by default, every time you work with a block, our system is actually inspecting that block's database table, figuring out its columns, figuring out what columns what needs to load, and actually doing the select function from that database table. That's even if you have regular caching on and certain bits of data from the system, from the block, are being loaded from the cache. Whenever that block goes out to get its detailed data from its own special block database table, it does so with dynamic real-time database querying. So what cache block record does is it says, okay, you're already caching the basic block data. About every single block. Let's also cache the detailed data from that block's database table along with that object. And we made that a separate setting because there are some very complicated blocks where that assumption could not be done. And there's the product list block in concrete5 e-commerce is a bit of a beast, and the way that it stores its data is not compatible with the way that we would implement this cache block record. So we made it false just in order to have maximum backward compatibility, but almost all the time you can set that to true. And by setting it to true, that means that if the block is cached, it stores the data that found in the block's detail table along with that same info. It stores the instance data, the record. And that will help lighten the load on your database. So that's what that does. The rest of the items are all about output caching. So the block record is a behind-the-scenes data about a block, but the output is actual HTML that you see rendered on a page. Most blocks we have cache block output false. And so what that means is that every time you visit a page, even if it's retrieving data about the block, it will always go into the view layer and render the view in real time. So whatever is in view.php for that block, it will process and display that HTML. If you turn cache block output to true, it will render it once, save that output, the HTML that's actually displayed to the user, and set it aside, and then check. And if it's there, it will display it right from there without actually parsing view.php. And so that, as you might imagine, for some pretty complex blocks, that is a bit of that can be a performance improvement. Not all blocks should cache their output, though. So, for example, the heaviest block that we use this on is the content block. The content block is a perfect example of why we might want to cache the block output, because every time we render a content block, we're not only loading HTML from the database, we are also checking. When you work with the content block in concrete5, we're not always just storing straight HTML. Sometimes we store what we call placeholders to different stuff. Like whenever you link to a page in the content block, like using this built-in concrete5 toolbar, we don't actually store the hard-coded link. We store a placeholder which references that page by ID. And what's cool about that is anytime you move the page in your site, the links don't break in your content block. They actually, since it's storing the ID, every time the content block is rendered, the view.php, we actually go through, find all of those placeholders, and replace them with the current active link to that page on your site. So, the paths are always up to date. The files are always up to date. It's really nice. That actually means that when we insert an image, the image that we insert is actually up to date based on its version in the file manager. So you could go into the file manager, you could replace the file, and then everywhere this is reference, it will be a new image. So it's really nice, but as you might imagine, that comes with a price. So whenever, if I look in the content block, in view.php, we are running a function called getContent from the controller. And that function runs something called translate from, and that stands for translate from the database. And so here you can see this is run on the database contents. It's just a bunch of regular expression replace that runs a bunch of functions inside this this controller. Referencing objects, getting the page objects, all this kind of stuff. There's definitely a lot of processing that happens every time this view is loaded. So that's why we cache the output. So the first time this block is output, it will run through all this stuff, and then it will save that output. And the next time it's run, since cache block output is true, it will show it. It will show the cached version. And this is perfect for the content block because the content block is relatively fixed. You can't do any interactive stuff in this. What you set in here is cacheable. It's just content. It just might happen to change over time. So it's a perfect example of something that can benefit from this caching because it's not dynamic. On the contrary, there are certain things that we can't as easily cache. For example, let's say we had a what's a good example here? Let's say we have a survey. We can't as easily cache this block because if I vote on this, if I were to cache this block, if I vote, the page is going to reload, and it's not going to show this because that block is cached, and it already has the output. It's going to just show it. And if I want this to show up in real time, it's going to be a problem to cache it. Similarly, we can't as easily cache the guestbook block because then the moment I submit a comment to it, it's not going to be cached anymore. Now you could get around this by clearing the cache when you save entries, so this is something to keep in mind. But by default, we're not caching that stuff. We do have some additional parameters that you can set to control some of that stuff. So by default, if you cache the block output, you can say true, but anytime the page is viewed with a post, it will not be cached. And anytime it is viewed by someone who's logged in, it will not be cached. That's because there are many times when you can rely on a block being cacheable and being static for guests on your site. But when you're logged in, it will probably change. Similar with post, the block might always look the same, but the moment you submit to it, you may want to show errors at the top of it, and that's why it would need to not be cached when you post to it. An example of a block that can be cached for guests, but not cached for registered users, but also can be cached on post, is the autonav block. The autonav block is a great example of a block that can benefit from this stuff because it's fairly complex. It's got to traverse parts of your site. But when you're logged out, everyone is a guest in concrete5 when they're logged out. So the autonav block, even though it will hide pages that users don't have permission to see, since logged out users are always anyone visiting a concrete5 site that's logged out, they're all the same, we can rely on that block to be cacheable when registered users are, when it's not being viewed by a registered user. So that's what we've got here. We cache the block output. We cache the block output on post because obviously the AutoNav block doesn't care about posts, but we do not cache it for people who are logged in. And that way we can make sure to have the block be cacheable, but not show you pages you don't have access to see when you're logged in. And finally, there's one last parameter here, the BT cache block output lifetime. By default, it's going to be whatever your cache is set to on your site, which is I think like 12 hours or maybe no expiration, although I believe Zencache has its own built-in expiration. But the AutoNav, we found that having it set that high was a bad idea because sometimes if you add pages on your site, AutoNavs may not be up to date. If that's the case, you don't want that. So we've set the lifetime to just 5 minutes, and that is that right there is the cache settings.